Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she finished her morning workout at the military base gym. The sound of laughter echoed from the women's locker room as she pushed open the heavy door. Her fellow soldiers were gathered around their phones, sharing videos and cracking jokes about the latest social media trends. "Did you see that TikTok where the guy tries to do pull-ups and falls into the pool?" laughed Jessica, a fellow private who had joined the army the same week as Sarah. "That's nothing compared to what happened to Rodriguez yesterday during training," chimed in another voice. "He thought he could impress the new recruits with his push-up skills and ended up face-first in the mud." Sarah smiled and shook her head as she opened her locker. At 23, she was one of the younger soldiers on the base, but she had quickly earned respect for her dedication and natural leadership abilities. While others gossiped and joked, Sarah often found herself thinking about military strategy and wondering what it would be like to lead troops into real situations. The base was located in a small town in Texas, where everyone knew everyone else's business. Most of the soldiers came from similar backgrounds, small towns, working-class families, looking for steady work and a chance to serve their country. Sarah was no different, except for one thing that set her apart from many of her peers: she actually enjoyed studying military history and tactics in her free time. "Sarah, you're so serious all the time," Jessica said, noticing her friend's thoughtful expression. "When was the last time you just relaxed and had fun?" "I have fun," Sarah protested, though she knew Jessica had a point. While others spent their evenings watching movies or playing video games, Sarah could often be found in the base library, reading biographies of famous military leaders or studying different battle strategies throughout history. The locker room conversation shifted to weekend plans. Most of the women were planning to go into town, hit the local bars, maybe catch a movie. Sarah listened politely but didn't contribute much to the planning. She had different priorities. "You should come with us this weekend, Sarah," urged Maria, an older soldier who had been in the army for 5 years. "All work and no play isn't healthy." Sarah appreciated the invitation, but she had already made plans to attend a leadership seminar that was being offered on the base. It wasn't required, and most soldiers wouldn't voluntarily give up their weekend for extra training, but Sarah saw it as an opportunity to learn something new. As the women continued chatting and getting dressed, Sarah noticed something unusual happening outside the locker room. Through the small window, she could see several high-ranking officers walking quickly across the courtyard, their expressions serious and focused. Something was clearly happening, but she couldn't tell what. The relaxed atmosphere in the locker room was suddenly interrupted when Sergeant Williams burst through the door. Her face was flushed and she looked like she had been running. "Everyone needs to report to the main assembly hall immediately," she announced breathlessly. "Full dress uniform, and I mean immediately. No questions, no delays." The laughter and casual conversation stopped abruptly. When Sergeant Williams used that tone of voice, everyone knew it was serious business. The women quickly finished dressing and hurried to put on their formal uniforms. As they walked across the base toward the assembly hall, Sarah noticed that soldiers from all over the facility were converging on the same building. The atmosphere was tense and uncertain. Rumors started flying among the troops. "I heard there's been some kind of emergency," whispered one soldier. "Maybe it's a surprise inspection from the higher-ups," suggested another. "Or maybe we're being deployed somewhere," added a third voice nervously. Sarah walked quietly, observing everything around her. She noticed that several vehicles with government license plates were parked outside the administration building. Whatever was happening, it involved people from outside their base. The assembly hall was packed with soldiers standing in neat rows, all wearing their dress uniforms. The room buzzed with quiet conversation as everyone tried to figure out what was going on. Sarah stood with her unit, maintaining proper posture and waiting for someone to explain the situation. At exactly 1,400 hours, Colonel Henderson walked onto the stage at the front of the hall. He was accompanied by several people that Sarah didn't recognize, civilians in expensive suits who looked like they might be from Washington, D.C. At ease, Colonel Henderson commanded, and the room fell completely silent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have received some unexpected news that affects our entire base," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the large room. "As you know, Our base has been selected to participate in a new experimental leadership program designed by the Pentagon. Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly. She had heard rumors about this program but didn't think their base would be chosen to participate. The program is designed to identify and develop natural leadership abilities in soldiers who might not otherwise have the opportunity to demonstrate their potential, the colonel continued. Over the past 6 months, your performance has been carefully monitored and evaluated by a team of military psychologists and leadership experts. The room remained silent, but Sarah could feel the tension building. Everyone was wondering where this announcement was leading. Based on comprehensive evaluations that included your performance in training exercises, your problem-solving abilities, your interactions with fellow soldiers, and your overall commitment to military excellence, one soldier from this base has been selected for immediate promotion to a command position. Now the silence was deafening. A command position meant jumping several ranks ahead of the normal promotion schedule. It was almost unheard of for someone so young and relatively inexperienced to be given such an opportunity. The soldier selected for this honor has demonstrated exceptional leadership potential, strategic thinking abilities, and the respect of their peers, Colonel Henderson announced. Private Sarah Martinez, please step forward. Sarah felt like the world had suddenly stopped moving. She heard her name, but for a moment she couldn't process what it meant. Around her, she could hear gasps and whispers from her fellow soldiers. Jessica grabbed her arm in shock. That's you! Jessica whispered urgently. Go! Sarah's legs felt weak as she stepped out of formation and walked toward the front of the assembly hall. Every eye in the room was focused on her, and she could hear the murmur of surprised voices behind her. She had no idea this was coming and couldn't believe it was really happening. When she reached the front of the room, Colonel Henderson looked at her with a mixture of pride and seriousness. Private Martinez, he said formally, you are hereby promoted to the rank of lieutenant and will assume command of Bravo Company effective immediately. Your new assignment comes with significant responsibilities and challenges that will test everything you have learned during your military service. One of the civilians stepped forward carrying a small wooden box. Inside was a set of lieutenant's bars and other insignia that represented her new rank. The promotion was happening so quickly that Sarah barely had time to process what it meant. You will report to the command center at 0800 tomorrow morning to receive your first briefing as a company commander, Colonel Henderson continued. Your performance in this role will be closely monitored as part of the leadership development program. Sarah accepted the box containing her new insignia and managed to find her voice. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. I'm sure you won't, Lieutenant, the colonel replied with a slight smile. The soldiers under your command are experienced and capable, but they will be looking to you for leadership and guidance. This is your opportunity to prove that young leaders can be just as effective as those with more years of experience. As Sarah walked back toward her unit, she could see the shocked expressions on the faces of her fellow soldiers. Some looked impressed, others appeared envious, and a few seemed genuinely happy for her success. The easy camaraderie of the locker room felt like it had happened weeks ago instead of just an hour earlier. When the assembly was dismissed, Sarah was immediately surrounded by soldiers offering congratulations and asking questions about her new position. The attention was overwhelming, and she wasn't sure how to respond to all of it. I can't believe they chose you over some of the guys who have been here for years, said one soldier, and Sarah couldn't tell if it was meant as a compliment or a criticism. You totally deserve it, Jessica said loyally. You're always studying and working harder than anyone else. As the crowd around her gradually dispersed, Sarah found herself walking alone back to her barracks. She looked down at the box in her hands and tried to comprehend how much her life had just changed. Tomorrow morning she would be responsible for leading an entire company of soldiers, many of whom had more military experience than she did. The weight of the responsibility was starting to sink in. These weren't just numbers on a chart or names in a file, they were real people whose safety and success would depend on her decisions. The thought was both exciting and terrifying. That evening, Sarah sat on her bunk and carefully examined her new insignia. The lieutenant's bars felt heavy in her hands, representing not just a promotion in rank but a completely new level of responsibility and authority. She thought about all the military leaders she had studied and wondered if any of them had felt this mixture of pride and anxiety when they first received their commands. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her mother back home, heard through the grapevine that something big happened at the base today. Call me when you can. News traveled fast in small military communities, and Sarah realized that by tomorrow morning, everyone in her hometown would probably know about her promotion. The thought made her even more determined to succeed in her new role. As she prepared for bed, Sarah could hear conversations in the hallway outside her room. Soldiers were discussing her promotion, speculating about what it meant for the base, and debating whether someone so young could handle such a significant responsibility. She tried to block out the voices and focus on the challenges ahead. Tomorrow would bring her first day as a company commander, and she needed to be ready for whatever that might involve. The laughter and casual atmosphere of the morning locker room seemed like it belonged to a different lifetime, when her biggest concern was deciding whether to attend a weekend leadership seminar. Now she was facing the real thing, actual leadership responsibility with real consequences for real people. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah wondered if she was truly ready for what lay ahead, or if the military leadership experts had made a mistake in choosing her for such an important role. Sarah woke up at 0530, 30 minutes before her usual alarm. Sleep had been restless, filled with dreams about leading troops into impossible situations and making decisions that affected people's lives. The reality of her new position hit her immediately as she saw the lieutenant's insignia sitting on her dresser. She dressed carefully in her command uniform, taking extra time to ensure everything was perfect. The insignia felt foreign as she pinned them to her collar, but she knew she had to project confidence even if she didn't feel it internally. Walking across the base toward the command center, Sarah noticed how differently people looked at her now. Some soldiers she passed offered respectful salutes that she wasn't used to receiving. Others seemed to study her face, probably wondering if she was really ready for the responsibility she had been given. The command center was a building Sarah had only been inside twice before, both times for routine administrative tasks. Now she was walking in as the commanding officer of an entire company. The security guard at the entrance checked her ID and directed her to conference room B. Colonel Henderson was waiting for her, along with Captain Morrison, who had been serving as the interim commander of Bravo Company. Captain Morrison was a 15-year veteran who had been expecting to receive permanent command of the unit before Sarah's unexpected promotion. "Good morning, Lieutenant," Colonel Henderson said formally. "Captain Morrison will be briefing you on the current status of Bravo Company and then transitioning command to you." Captain Morrison's expression was neutral, but Sarah could sense some tension in the room. She realized this situation was probably just as awkward for him as it was for her. Bravo Company consists of 123 soldiers, Captain Morrison began, reading from a thick folder. They are currently responsible for base security operations, training support for new recruits, and maintenance of equipment in sectors 7 through 12. Sarah listened carefully, taking notes on everything Captain Morrison told her. The scope of responsibility was larger than she had imagined. Her company was responsible for critical operations that affected the entire base. "The soldiers in your command range in age from 19 to 42, Captain Morrison continued. 40% of them have deployment experience, including several who served in Afghanistan and Iraq. Many of them have more years of military service than you have been alive." The comment stung a little, but Sarah knew it was true. She would be commanding soldiers who had seen real combat while she had never been deployed outside of training exercises. "Your senior non-commissioned officer is Sergeant First Class Williams, the same Sergeant Williams who announced the assembly yesterday," Captain Morrison added. "She has 18 years of experience and basically runs the day-to-day operations of the company. You would be wise to listen to her advice." After the briefing, Sarah was escorted to her new office. It was small but functional, with a desk, filing cabinets, and a computer that gave her access to personnel files and operational reports. On the wall was a map of the base showing all the areas that her company was responsible for protecting and maintaining. At 0900, Sergeant First Class Williams knocked on her door. "Permission to enter, ma'am," she asked formally. "Please, come in," Sarah replied, standing up from her desk. Sergeant Williams was a tall woman with graying hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. Sarah had always respected her during their previous interactions, but now their relationship had completely changed. "Ma'am, I want to be straight with you from the beginning," Sergeant Williams said after closing the door. "The soldiers in this company are good people, but they're wondering if you're ready for this job. Some of them have been talking since yesterday, and not all of the conversation has been positive." Sarah appreciated the honesty, even though it was difficult to hear. "What kind of things are they saying?" "Some think the promotion was just for show, that the Pentagon wanted to make a statement about young leadership but didn't consider whether you have the experience to handle real situations. Others are willing to give you a chance but want to see what you're made of before they decide whether to follow your lead." Sarah nodded slowly. "What do you think, Sergeant?" Sergeant Williams studied her for a moment before responding. "I think you have potential, ma'am. I've watched you during training exercises, and you think before you act. You ask good questions and you don't pretend to know things you don't know. But potential isn't the same as proven ability." "How do I prove my ability?" Sarah asked. "By making good decisions when it matters," Sergeant Williams replied. "And by showing that you respect the experience of the soldiers under your command while still being willing to lead when leadership is needed." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. A young soldier entered and saluted. "Ma'am, there's a situation developing in Sector 9 that requires your attention," he reported. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. This was her first real test as a commander. "What kind of situation?" "There's been an equipment malfunction in the vehicle maintenance bay. One of the hydraulic lifts failed and there's a Humvee suspended about 8 feet off the ground with a soldier underneath working on the transmission." Sarah grabbed her hat and followed the soldier toward Sector 9, with Sergeant Williams close behind. As they walked quickly across the base, Sergeant Williams provided additional details. "The soldier underneath is Private Johnson. He's been with the company for 2 years and is one of our best mechanics. The hydraulic system has backup safety features, but nobody wants to risk moving the vehicle until we're sure what caused the failure." When they arrived at the maintenance bay, Sarah could see a crowd of soldiers gathered around the disabled lift. The Humvee was suspended at an angle, held in place by backup mechanical supports, but the situation looked precarious. Private Johnson was lying on a rolling platform underneath the vehicle, apparently calm but unable to move safely until the situation was resolved. Several soldiers were standing around discussing different approaches to getting him out safely. "What are our options?" Sarah asked the senior mechanic on duty. "We can try to activate the manual release for the hydraulic system, but if there's pressure still in the lines, it could cause the vehicle to drop suddenly," he explained. "Or we can bring in the crane from the other maintenance bay, but that will take about 30 minutes to set up." Sarah looked at the situation carefully. Private Johnson appeared to be in no immediate danger as long as the backup supports held, but the longer he remained under the vehicle, the greater the risk became. "Has anyone checked the hydraulic pressure readings?" she asked. "Not yet, ma'am," replied the mechanic. "We were waiting for instructions on how to proceed." Sarah realized that everyone was looking to her to make the decision. These were experienced soldiers who probably had their own opinions about the best course of action, but they were waiting for their commanding officer to take charge. "Sergeant Williams, please have someone check the pressure readings while I talk to Private Johnson," Sarah instructed. She walked over to where Private Johnson was lying under the vehicle. "How are you doing down there, Private?" "I'm okay, ma'am," he replied, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "The supports seem solid, and I'm not in any pain. I can wait as long as necessary for you to figure out the safest way to get me out of here." Sarah appreciated his calm attitude. A panicky soldier in this situation could make everything more dangerous. The pressure readings showed that the hydraulic system had completely depressurized, which meant that the manual release could be activated safely. However, Sarah noticed something that others had missed: the backup supports were not positioned optimally to handle the full weight of the vehicle if the hydraulic system failed completely. "I want everyone except essential personnel to move back 20 feet, she ordered. And I want 2 more backup supports positioned here and here before we attempt any kind of release. Some of the soldiers looked surprised by her caution, but Sergeant Williams immediately began directing people to follow Sarah's instructions. "Ma'am, the additional supports will take 15 more minutes to set up," reported the senior mechanic. "Are you sure that's necessary?" Sarah looked at the situation again, double-checking her assessment. She was confident that the extra precautions were worth the additional time, even though she knew some soldiers were probably thinking she was being overly cautious. "Yes, I'm sure," she replied firmly. "Private Johnson is not in immediate danger, and we have time to do this safely. I'd rather take a few extra minutes than risk someone getting hurt because we rushed the procedure." While the additional supports were being positioned, Sarah used the time to talk with some of the soldiers who were watching the operation. She asked questions about the equipment, listened to their suggestions, and explained her reasoning for the precautions she had ordered. When everything was finally ready, the manual release was activated smoothly and the vehicle was lowered safely to the ground. Private Johnson rolled out from underneath, stood up, and saluted. "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate you taking the time to make sure everything was done safely." As the soldiers began dispersing back to their regular duties, Sarah overheard a few conversations. "She seems to know what she's doing. At least she listens to people instead of just barking orders. That was good thinking about the additional supports. I didn't even notice that issue." Walking back toward the command center with Sergeant Williams, Sarah felt like she had passed her first small test. The situation had been resolved safely, and she had demonstrated that she could make decisions under pressure while still considering the input of experienced soldiers. "How do you think I did?" Sarah asked Sergeant Williams. "You did fine, ma'am," Sergeant Williams replied. "You asked the right questions, you listened to your people, and you made a safe decision even though some people thought you were being overcautious. That's exactly what a good commander should do." Back in her office, Sarah spent the rest of the morning reviewing personnel files and operational reports. She was starting to get a better understanding of the soldiers under her command and the various responsibilities her company handled. At lunchtime, she decided to eat in the enlisted dining facility instead of the officers' mess. It was an opportunity to interact informally with some of the soldiers in her company and get a better sense of their concerns and attitudes. The response was mixed. Some soldiers seemed pleased that their new commander was making an effort to connect with them, while others appeared uncomfortable with the informality of the situation. "Ma'am, you don't have to eat with us," said one sergeant. "Officers usually eat separately." "I want to get to know the people I'm working with," Sarah replied. "And I want to understand any issues or concerns you might have about our operations." The conversation that followed was revealing. Sarah learned about equipment shortages that were affecting training schedules, concerns about base security procedures that needed to be updated, and suggestions for improving efficiency in several areas. She also learned that some soldiers were still skeptical about her promotion. Not everyone was willing to voice their concerns directly, but she could sense underlying doubt about whether someone her age could handle the responsibilities of command. That afternoon, Sarah received word that Colonel Henderson wanted to see her in his office. She wondered if her handling of the morning's incident had been reported to him, and whether he approved of her decisions. "How was your first morning as a company commander?" Colonel Henderson asked when she arrived at his office. "Challenging but educational, sir," Sarah replied honestly. "I had to deal with a equipment malfunction situation, and I think it went well." "I heard about that. Sergeant Williams gave me a brief report. She said you handled it appropriately and safely." Colonel Henderson leaned back in his chair. "But I also heard that some of your soldiers are still questioning whether you're ready for this position." Sarah nodded. "Yes, sir. I'm aware that not everyone is convinced I can do this job. I'm hoping to prove myself through my actions rather than trying to argue about it." "That's a wise approach," Colonel Henderson agreed. "I have some news that will give you an opportunity to do exactly that. Next week, your company will be participating in a joint training exercise with units from 3 other bases. You'll be responsible for coordinating security operations for the entire exercise." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. A multi-base training exercise was a significant responsibility that would be closely watched by officers from several different installations. The exercise will simulate a base security emergency that requires coordination between multiple units, Colonel Henderson continued. Your performance will be evaluated not just by me, but by visiting officers who don't know anything about your background or the circumstances of your promotion. It will be an opportunity to prove your abilities on a larger stage. As Sarah walked back to her office, she realized that the relatively quiet first day she had experienced was probably just the calm before the storm. Next week would bring challenges that would test everything she had learned about leadership and military strategy. The weight of command was becoming more real with each passing hour. Tomorrow she would begin preparing for the training exercise that could make or break her career as a military officer. The week leading up to the joint training exercise passed in a blur of preparation meetings, equipment checks, and strategy sessions. Sarah spent every waking hour studying the exercise parameters, reviewing security protocols, and meeting with key personnel from the other participating bases. The exercise scenario was complex, a simulated terrorist attack on a fuel depot that would require coordinated response from 4 different military units. Sarah's company would be responsible for establishing perimeter security, coordinating evacuation procedures, and maintaining communication between all participating units. 3 days before the exercise, representatives from the other bases arrived for final planning meetings. Sarah found herself in a conference room with officers who had significantly more experience than she did. Major Peterson from Fort Carson had been in the Army for 12 years. Captain Rodriguez from Fort Hood was a combat veteran with 2 deployments. Lieutenant Colonel Chen from Fort Stewart had commanded battalion-level operations. Lieutenant Martinez will be coordinating security operations for the exercise, Colonel Henderson announced to the group. Sarah noticed the surprised glances exchanged between the visiting officers. She could practically see them wondering how someone so young had been given such a significant responsibility. Lieutenant, walk us through your security plan, Major Peterson requested, his tone neutral but clearly skeptical. Sarah stood and moved to the whiteboard where she had prepared a detailed diagram of the exercise area. Based on the scenario parameters, I've identified 3 critical vulnerability points that require overlapping security coverage, she began. For the next 30 minutes, Sarah outlined her comprehensive security plan. She had anticipated potential problems, identified backup procedures, and developed communication protocols that would allow rapid response to changing conditions during the exercise. The visiting officers asked pointed questions about her reasoning, challenged some of her assumptions, and tested her knowledge of tactical procedures. Sarah answered each question confidently, drawing on all the studying she had done over the years and the practical experience she had gained during her first week as a commander. Your plan is thorough, Lieutenant Colonel Chen acknowledged when she finished. But plans often fall apart when they encounter real-world complications. How will you adapt if the scenario changes during the exercise? I've developed contingency plans for the 3 most likely complications, Sarah replied, flipping to another page of her notes. Additionally, I've identified decision points where we can reassess and modify our approach based on developing circumstances. Major Peterson leaned forward in his chair. Lieutenant, can I ask how long you've held command of your unit? 8 days, sir, Sarah answered honestly. The room fell silent for a moment. Sarah could see the visiting officers processing this information and probably wondering if Colonel Henderson had made a mistake putting such an inexperienced officer in charge of a complex operation. 8 days, Major Peterson repeated slowly. And before that? I was a private, sir. Lieutenant Colonel Chen looked directly at Colonel Henderson. Sir, with respect, are you certain that Lieutenant Martinez is ready for this level of responsibility? Colonel Henderson met his gaze steadily. I am confident that Lieutenant Martinez will perform excellently. Her promotion was based on demonstrated abilities, not on politics or favoritism. After the meeting ended, Sarah remained behind to discuss final details with Colonel Henderson. She could tell he was feeling pressure from the visiting officers about his decision to put her in charge. Sir, if you think it would be better to have someone else coordinate the exercise, I understand, Sarah offered. Lieutenant, the whole point of this leadership development program is to test young officers under realistic conditions, Colonel Henderson replied. If I replaced you now because of pressure from other officers, it would defeat the purpose of the program entirely. The night before the exercise, Sarah couldn't sleep. She reviewed her plans repeatedly, checking and double-checking every detail. At 0300, she finally gave up trying to rest and went to the command center to review the latest intelligence updates and weather forecasts. She wasn't surprised to find Sergeant Williams already there, checking equipment and reviewing communication protocols. Couldn't sleep either, ma'am? Sergeant Williams asked. Too much to think about, Sarah admitted. I keep wondering if I've missed something important. Ma'am, I've been in the Army for 18 years, and I've never seen anyone prepare more thoroughly for an operation than you have for this exercise, Sergeant Williams said. You've thought through every detail and prepared for problems that most officers wouldn't even consider. At 0600, the exercise officially began. Sarah positioned herself in the command center with communication links to all 4 participating units. On the monitors around her, she could see live feeds from various parts of the base showing soldiers moving into their assigned positions. The first 2 hours went smoothly. All units reported that they were in position and ready to respond to the simulated emergency. Sarah felt cautiously optimistic that her planning had been adequate. Then, the exercise controllers introduced the first complication, a simulated equipment failure that knocked out primary communication with one of the participating units. Sarah had anticipated this possibility and immediately activated the backup communication protocol she had developed. Bravo team, this is command. Switch to backup frequency 77 Alpha and report status, she radioed calmly. The communication was restored within 2 minutes, and the exercise continued without significant disruption. At 10:30, the controllers introduced a second complication that Sarah hadn't specifically planned for, a simulated medical emergency involving multiple casualties that required immediate evacuation through the security perimeter. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she assessed the new situation. This wasn't one of the contingencies she had specifically prepared for, but she had developed flexible procedures that could be adapted to unexpected circumstances. All units, this is command. We have a medical evacuation scenario in progress. Security Team Alpha, maintain perimeter integrity while allowing emergency vehicle access through Checkpoint 3. Coordination Team Bravo, establish traffic control at intersection points 2 and 5. The evacuation proceeded smoothly, with medical vehicles moving quickly through the security perimeter without compromising the overall integrity of the operation. In the command center, Sarah could see Colonel Henderson and the visiting officers watching her performance closely. She tried to ignore their presence and focus on the developing situation. At 1200, the exercise controllers introduced the major crisis that would test everyone's abilities, a simulated secondary attack that required immediate redeployment of security forces while maintaining coverage of critical areas. This was the scenario that Sarah had been most concerned about during her planning. It required making rapid decisions about troop movements while ensuring that no critical areas were left vulnerable. Command, this is Major Peterson. My unit is requesting immediate backup at the north perimeter. We have multiple contacts approaching our position. Sarah looked at her tactical display and quickly assessed the situation. Major Peterson's unit was indeed facing a significant simulated threat, but redeploying forces to support them would create vulnerabilities elsewhere. Major Peterson, maintain your current position. I'm deploying Security Team Charlie to provide flanking support while keeping Team Delta in reserve to cover potential vulnerabilities. Negative, Command, Major Peterson responded. I need immediate reinforcement at my position or we risk being overrun. Sarah felt the pressure of the moment. Major Peterson had 12 years of experience and was questioning her tactical judgment in front of everyone monitoring the exercise. She could approve his request and avoid conflict, or stick with her assessment of the situation. She studied the tactical display again and confirmed her initial assessment. Major Peterson's position was strong enough to hold with minimal support, and redeploying significant forces would create exactly the kind of vulnerability that the enemy simulation was designed to exploit. Major Peterson, I understand your concerns, but I'm maintaining current deployment. Team Charlie will provide support, but I cannot risk creating gaps elsewhere in our perimeter. The next 10 minutes were tense as the simulated battle played out. Sarah watched the tactical display carefully, ready to modify her orders if the situation changed. Major Peterson's unit, supported by Team Charlie, successfully repelled the simulated attack without requiring additional reinforcement. More importantly, Sarah's decision to maintain overall perimeter integrity proved correct when the exercise controllers launched a simultaneous attack on a different section of the perimeter. Team Delta was in position to respond immediately, preventing what could have been a serious breach of security. At 1500, the exercise officially ended. Sarah felt drained but satisfied that her units had performed well under challenging circumstances. The final debriefing would determine whether her performance had been considered successful. The debriefing session was held in the main conference room with all participating officers present. Exercise controllers provided detailed analysis of each phase of the operation, highlighting both successful decisions and areas for improvement. Lieutenant Martinez demonstrated excellent preparation and maintained effective command and control throughout the exercise, reported the senior exercise controller. Her decision to maintain perimeter integrity during the 1200 crisis was tactically sound and prevented a potentially serious security breach. Major Peterson stood up to speak. I want to say that I initially had doubts about Lieutenant Martinez's experience level, but her performance today was impressive. She made difficult decisions under pressure and maintained the overall mission focus even when individual unit commanders were requesting different actions. Lieutenant Colonel Chen nodded in agreement. The lieutenant's planning was thorough, her communication was clear, and her tactical decisions were sound. Age and experience are not always the same thing as competence and judgment. After the debriefing ended, Sarah found herself surrounded by congratulations from soldiers and officers alike. The successful exercise had demonstrated to everyone that her promotion had been based on merit rather than politics. Colonel Henderson approached her as the crowd began to disperse. Outstanding work, Lieutenant. You proved today that young leaders can be just as effective as experienced ones when they combine natural ability with thorough preparation. Walking back across the base that evening, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that morning in the locker room just 2 weeks ago. The casual laughter and gossip seemed like it had happened in a different lifetime, before she understood the weight and responsibility of military leadership. She passed the women's locker room where it all began and could hear familiar voices inside, probably discussing weekend plans and sharing stories about their day. For a moment, she felt a pang of nostalgia for the simpler time when her biggest decision was whether to attend an optional training seminar. But, as she continued toward her quarters, Sarah realized that she didn't want to go back to that time. The challenges of command were difficult and stressful, but they were also deeply satisfying in a way that routine duties could never be. Over the following weeks, Sarah settled into her role as company commander with growing confidence. The soldiers under her command had seen her perform under pressure and no longer questioned whether she deserved her position. The successful training exercise had established her credibility and earned her the respect of her peers and superiors. 3 months later, Sarah received a letter from the Pentagon informing her that she had been selected for an advanced leadership development program that would fast-track her career toward higher levels of command. The letter mentioned her exceptional performance during the joint training exercise and her potential for future leadership roles. That evening, Sarah called her mother to share the news. "I always knew you were special," her mother said proudly. "Even when you were little, you were always organizing the neighborhood kids and coming up with plans for everything." Sarah smiled, remembering those childhood days when her biggest leadership challenge was organizing backyard games and planning neighborhood adventures. "Mom, sometimes I still can't believe this is really happening," Sarah admitted. 6 months ago I was just another soldier following orders, and now I'm responsible for more than 100 people." "You earned it through hard work and dedication," her mother replied. "And, from what I hear, you're doing an excellent job." As Sarah hung up the phone, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this point. The transition from the relaxed atmosphere of casual military life to the serious responsibilities of command had happened quickly, but each challenge had prepared her for the next level of responsibility. The laughter that had filled the locker room that morning seemed like an echo from a different person's life. Sarah was still the same person who had enjoyed the camaraderie of her fellow soldiers, but she had discovered capabilities within herself that she hadn't known existed. Looking ahead, Sarah knew that greater challenges awaited her. The advanced leadership program would bring new responsibilities and higher expectations. But she also knew that she had proven to herself and others that she could handle whatever came next. The young woman who had wiped sweat from her forehead in a gym locker room had become a confident military officer ready to face the challenges of an uncertain future. The commander's uniform that had once seemed impossible to imagine wearing now felt like a natural part of who she was meant to be.